Hey everyone, this is Josh back with Cardboard Chronicles, and today I've brought back Justin to talk about the current hot topic going on in the hobby, and that's altered cards. Uh, this is something that was started from a blowout thread, and now I feel it needs to be addressed. So I brought on Justin to help me out with this one. Today we're going to go over everything you need to know about altered cards, how to protect yourself, and also how we as a hobby can find solutions going forward. So Justin, why don't you start us off? Tell us the background of what's going on, and we'll jump right into it.
It would be my pleasure, Joshua. It's great to see you again. All right. Oh, Jesus. It feels like this has been going on for over a year, but I think early December, an enterprising blowout user posted some before and after pictures of various cards that he had found that looked like they had been altered. And two of those were two of the biggest cards in the hobby, essentially the biggest card in the hobby right now. And it was two LeBron exquisite rookie patch autos numbered to 99, both of which were owned currently by Eric, Buy Nice Cards. And just as a bit of background, so Eric, over the past 3 or 4 years, has become one of the biggest players in the hobby marketplace, from both a volume and a quality perspective. So whether it's low end, mid end, high end, Eric has tons and tons and tons of cards, and he's essentially built his own marketplace, his own retail shop for these items. So the combination of seeing two of the biggest, 6-figure plus cards that had been cleaned up, and seeing them in such a high profile marketplace was very concerning. So obviously everybody jumped in on this, and the thread certainly went on for, I think we're around 165 pages now. But within that thread, it was proven full stop that those two LeBron exquisite RPAs have been altered at some point during their lifetime. And the extent of that lifetime, in terms of who knew what about what cards, when things happened. There's a couple very good timelines and that are within the thread that discuss kind of everything that we know. And while we can't nail down specifics of who exactly did what to the cards, who's ultimately responsible for dropping the knife, we can say that not only are those two LeBron exquisites altered, but there's a number of other cards that were raised in the thread that are varying degrees of likelihood as to whether or not they've been altered. Another one specifically, which unfortunately was a big dollar high-end basketball card, was a 2009-2010 LeBron exquisite number pieces that very clearly has had some sort of work done to it to clean up some surface issues that were on the back of the card. So again, the purpose of Josh and I catching up today is not to relitigate every single post of that extensive thread. We would both encourage anybody to go back and revisit not only the totality of the thread, but again, there's very specific timelines that were laid out, very factually based from several different members that get into kind of what we know. But I think out of this, to see that one of the biggest marketplaces of sports cards and specifically high-end basketball cards had multiple instances of trim cards, altered cards within his marketplace, kind of set up any number of red flags. And I think the biggest flag for us was that this trim cards, altered cards, it's kind of always been the monster in the closet or under the bed that everybody kind of knows about, but it doesn't really affect them, or hopefully it doesn't affect you, because obviously when it does, you've got some real decisions to make. But it kind of brought this into the spotlight that this is a very real thing. And as we've seen in the several weeks since then, there's been more and more and more cards that have come out, all with very different stories to tell of how they got there and the different degrees of evidence that we've been able to see linking kind of the before and after state of those cards. So I think as Josh mentioned, we wanted to use that as a segue to get into kind of what are altered cards and trim cards and different best practices that we've seen in the threads and some of the posts, and hopefully just kind of start that dialogue of to make people aware that unfortunately this has not gone away. If anything, it's gotten much worse and much more sophisticated in terms of how this is being done.
Yeah, we talked before, and before setting up this interview, and we kind of knew this interview could go two ways. It was either down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out every card and every story and every scenario, or the other way, which is what we chose to do, of educating the hobby, educating people on what are alter cards, how we can help each other. We feel that's more valuable, and I understand. We might get some backlash on not addressing every single scenario and story directly, but we kind of just refer to the thread for that kind of stuff. And we're gonna, like you said, we're gonna jump into the more helpful side of things and educating, and hopefully come up with some nice resolutions for the hobby going forward, right?
Yeah, and I think to your point about the rabbit hole, there's nothing wrong with the rabbit hole. I mean, that's essentially what we want and encourage people to do,
Yep.
and we've seen success with that we'll get into a little bit more later. So the rabbit holes are great, just not necessarily for what we're trying to accomplish today, like you said.
Right. So let's take a step back, and why don't you just talk about grading? Because I think if we understand the concept of grading, it might lend itself into what we're talking about with altered cards.
Yeah, absolutely. So I obviously a lot of this will be stuff that most people already know, but just to kind of set the stage. So grading is essentially adding value to a card that you would pull out of a pack by having a professional review service, whether that's Beckett Grading Services, PSA. I don't know what PSA stands for. SGC. Those are kind of the big three. But sending the card to them for them to review the card for various characteristics and criteria. Some of those include centering, surface, edges, corners, some vintage stuff. They examine the quality of the color to see if it's faded, washed out, if it's bright, different stuff like that. So basically, you can send your card to a professional, have the professional evaluate it, and then they will return a numerical grade that assigns a different level of quality from 1 to 10, essentially, for what condition your card is in. And you would think that certain criteria would be more objective than others, specifically centering. I think the standard dimensions of a card are like 3.5 inches by 2 3/4 or 2.5, something like that. So, every single card out of a pack, within a certain very small degree of tolerance, should be roughly the same size. So, you establish the size of the card, you establish borders, and then you can grade something like how well centered the card is. Well, subjectivity unfortunately seems to rule the day over objectivity, because we've seen throughout the years that cards that'll be wildly off center still grade much higher than you would expect. Cards that you can see scuffs and dings on the surface, they grade very well. And kind of the flip side of that as well, where there's nothing wrong with something, yet it takes a big hit. So while there is objectivity involved, it only goes to a certain extent. And at the end of the day, it's ultimately a person sitting and looking at a card at one of these grading surfaces for, I think we've heard recently that the maximum amount of time that they have to review any single card is 60 seconds. So within that 60-second window, it's a matter of evaluate 4 criteria and then assign a grade to one of these cards. So it's a very valuable service, as we've seen, and we'll kind of get into. And I think that's born to bear, especially with, I think, in the past couple of days, we've seen where PSA has extended turnaround times on a couple of their different service levels because they're just so backlogged. So it's not only the high-end LeBrons and stuff like that people send in and can see a spike in value. It's also your dozens and dozens of Luka Prism base rookies and Giannis rookies, stuff like that. I mean, every single card, if it grades favorably, it will see some sort of value increase.
All right, so we'll kind of circle back into how the grading companies play into this scenario. But first, let's talk about what are altered cards at a high level, and maybe someone out there isn't quite sure of all the different scenarios you can encounter with an altered card. So why don't you walk us through some of the different alterations that you might encounter with a card?
Sure. So there's any. It seems like there's any number of different ways that a card can be deemed altered, but I'd say the big ones, just so we don't talk about this for hours, are trimming a card to remove blemishes from the edges or a dinged corner. So essentially, if you have a card with a bad corner, or some flaking on the edge, kind of like what we saw with the LeBron, I think it was the 74, no, the 87 was the one that had some chipping on the black border. So what was done there is somebody was able to remove that chipping by either sanding it down, cutting like 1/64th of an inch off of the edge of the card, whatever it might be, to get rid of that particular blemish. And that is altering the card from its pack pulled state. So, it's very different than, say, you have a fingerprint on a prism card and you wipe away that fingerprint with, just like a microfiber cloth that you would use for your sunglasses. This is physically altering the card beyond, its original conditions or dimensions or whatever the case might be. That, it's just, you picks up dings and scratches throughout the years. It's a 20-year-old piece of cardboard. That's not good. That's very, very, very bad. And the types of tools that we've seen trimmers use range anywhere from, an X-Acto knife that you can get from a hobby shop to sophisticated, what are they called, the paper cutters, which we'll kind of get into in a few minutes regarding a specific example. All the way, I've heard of guys using laser cutters. I mean, again, that can get these cards, knock just the slightest little condition blemishes off in order to significantly increase the value, and do it in such a way that the professional grading companies, it still falls within their tolerable levels or whatever it is that they look for, so they go undetected and ultimately end up in these slabs. And I would say that trimming's been around forever. Like when I first got back into cards in college in the early 2000s, I would go to a local show at the Raleigh State Fairgrounds in North Carolina, and you'd walk around, and everybody's got a few nice things. And then there was this one table, and it was just 7 or 8 cases of all BGS 9.5 gold labels, just nothing but gold labels on condition sensitive cards like contenders, rookie autographs in football, what would have been big basketball cards at the time, like early 2000s. Yeah, it was mainly the contender stuff, like Vic stuff, Breeze stuff, whatever. And I'd ask my buddy and be like, wow, that guy's got a really great eye for grading. Well, as I would come to find out, it was, if you just Google Kevin Burge or Shoeless Joe Jackson, it was somebody who was very, very proficient at cleaning cards up to receive a favorable grade. So it's one of those things. That's almost 20 years ago that I can remember my first kind of interaction with trimmers, with trimming, and just the phenomenon itself. So it's something that's been around, and it's not going away. And especially as we found over the past couple months, it's very much alive, and I think it's kind of progressed to such sophisticated levels that nobody would have really expected at this point.
Yeah, so just to circle back on the grading side of it, a lot of times what you'll see is like a card that has edges or corners of like 8 or 8.5, and you'll see the whitening, and then the trimmer will actually, like you said, remove that. And then if it's still within the dimensions for the grading companies, you'll see them pop back up with edges of 9.5 and 10s and corners of 9.5s. So you're seeing bumps from potentially BGS 8s, 8.5s to 9.5s, and in a lot of cases that double, triple, maybe even more exponentially increases the value of the card. So that's the incentive for people to do the trimming. And that's really the scary part about this is the incentive is money, and that's the the greatest incentive in this hobby is to continue to do this if there's money involved. So uh, we have to start increasing the lines of defense, and the first line of defense is grading. And if these companies aren't going to spot these, then we need to make them more aware. We need to educate ourselves like we've been doing with these threads and videos like this. So we have to keep increasing the lines of defense of how do we get this out of the hobby, because it's not going to go anywhere, to your point, just based on how much money people are making from it.
Yeah, and it used to be, kind of a badge of honor when you would have if you had like a pop one or pop two of a very high graded card, whether it was like a mint 9 or a gem 9.5, and you were the only one that had that 9.5 out of 10, 20, 30 graded, whatever it was. But now we've kind of swung the other way in terms of especially in the high dollar market, where if you have something that's known to be condition sensitive, and it's a kind of an exemplary high grade, it's almost raises more of a red flag than it does a oh damn that's nice, like it kind of used to. So
Yeah.
it's just one of those things that we've kind of come full circle and how we need to address it.
So do you think that based on what we're seeing lately, that the premium on higher grades will decrease over time, or are we still going to see the same premiums?
I don't know. I think it's an interesting question that I know I've talked about with you and some other folks as well. And I don't necessarily know if it swings significantly, because at the end of the day, people will always want what's considered to be the best. And if it's very fact based. If you have one of something out of 20 or 30, and you can point to a grading company's population report and say, this is it, this is the one. People are always going to want what they deem to be the best. But I think the whole concept of what the best is now has shifted a little bit, or now there's a much bigger qualifier around what's the best than I think there might have been in the past.
Yeah. Can you talk about what kind of cards you can look for to be trimmed? Because in my estimation, it's mostly the thicker cards with the patches, but I've seen I know there's a lot of it that goes on in vintage as well. Are we seeing it with a lot of these thinner cards as well?
Yeah, it certainly seems like it. So I'm not even gonna touch vintage because I don't know enough about that stuff, because that's a whole nother world of, because there's some forum right now on the Net 54 boards, which are primarily vintage baseball, about how somebody cleaned up the back of like a tape stain from like a 30s Ted Williams, and it went from a crazy low grade to like a 7 or something that's very, very high considering the set. Like I don't know how to that's beyond my kind of purview, but just in terms of like the quote unquote modern stuff, so mid 90s to now, I would say that your prisms, your tops chromes, um, stuff like that, especially the Panini shiny stuff. That's less, I would say, and again, this is just generally speaking, but it's less susceptible to trimming, just because the condition of these cards straight out of the pack. And I mean, I think this is a good chance to just kind of preach the benefits of going into a population report. So to take a step back, what a pop report is BGS and PSA publish the number of cards that have bbeen graded, or the number of grades that have been assigned to a specific card, I should say. So, for example, if there's you can go in and you want to look at what Giannis Prism Silver rookies have graded. So you want to see how many gems there are. So you can go in at no charge. You do have to create an account for PSA and BGS, but you can go in and search, okay, Prism Silver, Giannis basketball, and it will show you the total number of Prism Silvers graded. It will show you the number of 8.5s, 9s, 9.5s, 10s. Same thing for PSA. So you can see, okay, the percentage of gem mints is X, or whatever the case may be. So it's a very, very valuable tool to understand if you're considering buying a card. Okay, what percentage are gems? Is there a reason why there's a low number of gems, because as we've seen, like for the 12-13 prisms, a lot of those came out off centered. And centering was the thing that held a lot of those, like the Anthony Davises, the Kawhis, that held those back from being gems as opposed to something lower. So you can go in and see the distribution of grades, and then you can take a step back and try and figure out why that's the case. So that's very, very valuable information, and it's free information. Again, you'll need an account to sign in, but you don't for PSA, but you do for BGS. So that's I would say, if anybody ever has questions about grading, or how many of a certain grade are out there, consult the pop reports. They're really helpful.
So that's helpful, really quick. That's helpful because if you see a card that's like, 5%, that's 5% of that card gem, and you come across a gem card, you should, raise your suspicions just slightly based on the fact that the odds of this being gem are so low, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your original question, I mean, I think the cards to look for, like you said, are going to be thicker stock cards that we know kind of rattled around in the box.
Yeah.
You're going to get dinged up corners, dinged up edges during the general distribution process, let alone if they're older cards that have been passed down, traded hands a lot. Obviously stuff that's going to have darker borders. So UD Black is kind of worst case scenario, because not only was it in pretty crappy packaging, but all the borders are black. So any kind of ding or dent is going to show those little flecks of white, and it's going to be plain as day.
Right.
I know I want to say 0304 UD Finite with the LeBron rookies. I think they were out of 200. Like there's only one of those that has gemmed, because they were thin card stock. They were kind of cheap from the card quality perspective, but again, they had darker borders. They were incredibly easy to chip and stuff like that. So the main things, if you see, a high graded card, you check the pop, and it's a low gem mint pop or a low mint pop, and it's just got kind of some of those telltale signs of okay, this is going to be hard to grade, because it's a thick card. It's got dark edges where you can easily see the wear. Right. Then that's worth doing a little bit more digging.
So next, can you tell us briefly about patch swapping? I don't want to get too into this, but just to educate everyone on, also, it's not just trimming. There's also people swapping out jersey patches out of cards.
No, absolutely, and unfortunately, one of our blowout members had to deal with this a couple months ago, and so what happens is guys will take a patch autograph card or a patch card that has just like a very basic one color patch, or maybe like the jersey piping that's just kind of boring, and swap it out with another more dynamic patch. And the kind of the old school way of doing it was just to X-Acto knife out of the window the original patch that was in there, pop in the new patch, and you're done. I mean, I remember seeing some back in the day where it was it was shown that the swapper just basically slapped the new patch over the old patch and sold it as is, like the original patch was still underneath. But unfortunately, we've gotten to the point where it's sophisticated enough now where you're hearing rumors of guys splitting the layers of cardstock down the middle, and then popping in an quote unquote authentic patch, but from like a lesser player. So the prime example is Anthony Davis. So some of the Anthony Davis Treasures RPAs that might have had just kind of that standard nameplate boring patch from the back of the jersey. Well, somebody figured out that you can split the card stock, drop in a nice patch from like an Austin Rivers Treasures RPA, re-adhere the card stock together, and no one's the wiser. No one knows any different. So I guess there's a couple things there. The first thing would be, and I guess the main thing would be, if you see a card like I'll use the Kevin Durant Exquisites, for example. So if you see a Kevin Durant Exquisites that's like 10 color breaks, 3 colors, just crazy patches, I mean, that should raise a bit of a red flag, because thankfully, way back when, there was I think he was a blowout guy, maybe on Hobby Kings, but he made a photo bucket and tried to capture every single Durant exquisite RPA that he ever saw, and he was able to trace probably 10 to 12 fakes. And in one instance, there was somebody who faked the patch for like a crazy 3-color patch and then faked it back to the original kind of green and black piping. So if you see something that just doesn't make sense on a card, start doing your research. It's very possible. Like 2009, 2010 Exquisite had all sorts of crazy, ridiculous patches because it was just an inventory dump for Upper Deck because they knew they were losing the license. So there, it makes a lot more sense that you might get something that you just wouldn't expect to see out of a box. But for other years, if you see something that's like a 4 or 5 color patch and you're doing your worth point research and you look at 100 different images and you've only seen 2 colors, then that should raise some sort of red flag. So, unfortunately, the trimming's kind of taken the spotlight here in the past couple months, but the patch swapping is still a very, very real issue that we have to deal with because it significantly increases the value of these cards.
Right. And it's great to call out the different tools that you can use because nowadays we have a lot more tools at our disposal to be able to find this stuff like WorthPoint, PWCC, Marketplace, to be able to look at past sales. There's a lot of things we can use to kind of help us spot some of this stuff. So it's good to call those out as well. All right, so the next topic is about bringing forth evidence towards a card possibly being trimmed and how you go about that, not only on the threads, but maybe Instagram, or like how should the community police itself and how should we be responsible for finding these cards that are trimmed?
Yeah, I think the positive kind of offshoot of all this is just the number of threads and discussions that we've seen that have been incredibly productive in terms of, I found this card, what do you guys think? And it's almost like a kind of a sliding scale of certainty regarding the alteration. So I'll use our friend Super Dan from the Blowout Boards as kind of the gold standard exemplar of of a line of evidence that you can put together to show that yes, this has indeed been altered. So it was a baseball thread. It was about a Bryce Harper, I think Bowman Blue rookie or something like that. But Super Dan was able to identify the card. He circled specific areas in before pictures and after pictures where the card had been altered. He was able to track down the user information of the seller to such a degree that he found that this particular seller was posting on some sort of, I think Cal State Berkeley or something like that message board asking for engineers for hire who were proficient with using sophisticated paper cutters. I mean, it not only was he able to identify the before and after differences in the card, which is, essentially ironclad in and of itself, but he found where the guy was trying to buy help to help him cut these cards. I mean, that is open and shut. There's no denying the information that he posted in that thread and the manner in which he did it and the facts that he presented to say that, yes, this card has been altered. In an ideal world, we would all be able to put together that type of documentation and support whenever we have questions. But we're not all Super Dan. So I would say that the main thing is, first of all, don't if you think something is in question, don't necessarily be afraid to post it and ask for other people's input or thoughts on why. I guess the only caution or hesitation I would have is that if you do have questions about something, but you're not 100% sure that it's been trimmed based on what you've seen and what you've been able to present in your post, don't just spam altered, or whatever, all like in the title of the thread or in the body of the thread itself. Don't just come out and say this card has been altered, thoughts, and then don't provide any backup. We've kind of seen in one of the threads with the cards where we initially thought it was altered and there was quite a bit of evidence to support that it was altered, but we were going off of, there was still limited, or we were missing a piece of the information.
Right.
And in that instance, it ended up that the owner, the current owner, originally had it slabbed with BGS and then slabbed it with PSA, and it stayed the same grade, and he had it the whole time. And we were missing basically a picture of the back of the card. So I guess it's almost a sliding scale of certainty. The main thing is if you have questions, ask. And there's any number of people, myself included, who love to dig around on WorthPoint and Google Images and see what we can find. I would just say that unless you have that before and after to be able to conclusively say that something has been altered, I would shy away from just kind of those absolutes, like again in the title of the thread, like trim card XXX or whatever. Just whether it's something like questions about LeBron UD Black autograph or something like that. That's fine, and that's good because everybody's been surprisingly pleasant in engaging as to whether or not a card has been altered, and I think it's helpful. People are learning a lot about the tools that we can use to figure this stuff out. I would just avoid absolutes unless you're absolutely certain.
Yeah, so it's definitely important to find these trim cards, but it's almost as important to not damage the reputation of people that aren't intentionally doing it the wrong way. So we have to be careful with that fine line of calling people out when we may not necessarily have all the information. So try to keep that in mind. I try to approach it as, assume positive intent until you find the evidence that's like, all right, now, now it's kind of swaying the other way. Now let's bring this information out and figure this out. Let's see. Let's jump over to bumping, because I think some people are getting the concept of bumping and trimmed confused, and they're just assuming that because a card gets a higher grade from its previous grade that it's automatically trimmed, which isn't true. So talk us through bumping and how that plays into this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just one more thing on the altered cards, like the threads that have been put together recently, they're working. I mean, I know Brent at PWCC pulled at least two auctions just based on people from Blowout reaching out to him and saying that you're running altered cards. Here is before and after proof that this card has been trimmed, even though it's slabbed. And to his credit, he has pulled those auctions. So again, when the threads when they stick to the facts, when they're able to clearly show before and after, the big boys are taking notice. And I think that's critical in order for us to be able to try and further root this out, because they're the ones that can go back to the owners of these cards and they can start to, whether it's a certain consignor sends in cards and they have more than one instance where they're sending in proven altered cards, that could raise red flags with on the consignment side. Maybe they won't do business with them anymore, or just stuff like that. But the main thing is it's working, and it's awesome to see that, and we definitely need this buy-in from the big boys.
Yeah, I also wanted to use this time to call out the fact that some people are starting to poke at maybe the grading companies are in on this, and maybe they're not doing their part properly. From my experience with the fake counterfeit cards, they were actually pretty willing and open to help fix this issue. So I wouldn't automatically assume the grading companies won't help. So do whatever you can to try to help educate the grading companies as well, because same thing that happened with counterfeits and fakes, like the community knew more about these specific cards, than some of the grading companies even did. So we actually we need these grading companies to help with this. So we need to partner with them in the same way that we have been with Brent, and trying to get him to take these listings down, because I think they're incentivized to clean this up as well. Otherwise, everything comes crumbling down. So we have to also use the grading companies in the same way to try to help us with this.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, if we lose trust in the grading companies, then like we're really screwed. I'm trying my best not to swear, but we're in big trouble if that happens.
All right.
Bumping.
No, yeah, that was good that you brought us back to the other thing. So let's go back to bumping now. So yeah, describe bumping.
Yeah, so bumping is, I mean, it's a game. it's a gambling game that everybody plays, and I think you can say with pretty good certainty that it's played by both the grading companies and it's played by their customers. So the concept of bumping is if you get back, say you get back a Giannis Silver Prism rookie, and it was graded by BGS, and two of the subgrades are a 9.5, and two of the subgrades are a 9. Well, the theory there is that, okay, I'm only 0.5 away. So if I get either a 0.5 bump in either of those 9 subgrades to a 9.5, then the overall grade of the card will be a 9.5, which again is a significant jump in monetary value of that particular card. So, you submit it once, BGS gives you the 9 that's 0.5 away. So that, of course, you get it back, you see it, and you're like, damn, I missed it by 0.5. And then the next line of thought is, oh, if I'm only 0.5 away, I'll just submit it again, and maybe the guy missed something the first time. So you submit it again. And, some people either crack the card out of the original slab and do it and submit it again raw, or they just submit it again in the original slab and hope that there's that bump. And once the grading company gets it back, they can kind of have their two different branches off the decision tree. It's either, okay, we can bump this, somebody missed something the first time, you're right, this should be higher, or we're not going to change it, we're going to send it back down, and you're probably going to send it back in anyway. So we'll make a little bit more cash on a grading fee, and it's just kind of this dance between both the grading companies and collectors or the owners of the cards, because of course owners want to maximize value and the grading companies want to maximize revenue on a specific card. So it's just this back and forth, almost war of attrition to see who blinks first. And it's one of those things when you think about it, like if you have a card that's worth $1,000 in its raw form or in whatever form it's in when you get it back the first time from a grading company, and you look that card over and you're like, I just don't see it. Like, I just think they missed this. And you want to send it back in knowing that that card will triple in value to like $3,000 if it comes back in the grade you think it should be in. Well, what's kind of your breaking point for the number of times you're willing to send it in and pay that, what it will say, $100 grading fee once you consider like shipping and all that stuff. How many times are you willing to roll the dice at $100 each to make $2,000? So it's always been fascinating to me, the people who are able to play the grading game, do it successfully, and the extent to which they will dig their heels in and just continue to slam these same cards over and over and over and over in order to hopefully get the grades that they're looking for.
Yeah, it's important to point out that it works a lot of times. Otherwise, people wouldn't be doing this, because I've seen instances where the variance between the two different people grading it is pretty high. Like, we've even seen entire grade bumps of like, surface from an 8 to a 9, or edges from an 8.5 to 9.5. There's like pretty wild variance from what I've seen, and that's the human error in grading, and bumping concept just takes advantage of that human error.
Yeah, and there's certain things that guys just miss too. Like, for example, I mentioned earlier, but like if you're just holding a card and you get a big old fingerprint on it, and that fingerprint stays on the card when it goes in for grading, like I think that's a full point reduction on the surface, because they consider that fingerprint grease or residue or whatever to be a blemish, and rightfully so. So if you got that one back and you just cleaned off your fingerprint with a microfiber and that was the only thing holding your card back from gemming, it's very, very, very likely going to gem again. So again, it's like you said, grading takes advantage of the human error component on both sides, from both the graders and the collectors, the owners, to hopefully increase value on both sides of the coin.
Yeah. So the original reason we brought up bumping is it plays a part in the trimming, in that you shouldn't automatically assume because you see a before and after, and the after having a higher grade, that it was trimmed. So it's a lot more evidence than just the higher grade. It's the before and after pictures where you actually see differences in the card. That's important to note, because the bumping stuff has been going on for a while, and it's not trimming. It's not the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, agreed. And again, I think there's to that point though, if specifically with BGS, if you see a subgrade is bumped like 2 or 3 points, then okay, that might
Right.
raise a bit of a red flag
Right.
if that was what was holding something back. So again, it's mainly just to reinforce that the facts are the most important thing that we can work with here in order to try and identify cards that have been altered.
Right. All right, so let's start moving into responsibilities. So what responsibilities are there from both buyer and seller to, protect buyer from themselves? Seller has a responsibility as, the owner of these items. What are the different responsibilities on each side of the coin?
Sure, and I know when we were originally talking, we tried to, or we thought we would break out the buyer piece and the seller piece, but at this point they're so inextricably linked because at some point everybody's going to be both a buyer and a seller. So it's just kind of the same points overlap for both groups, especially since we'll all be in both situations at some point. But I guess the main thing is if you have questions, there's tools available to help you answer those questions. And I'm going obviously beyond just asking people for help because that's always going to be available. But personally, there's so much information out there. Again, with WorthPoint, with Google image searches, where you can do your own research, whether it's on a patch, whether it's on general like condition of a card from a set that you're looking at, to say, okay, I can't find the exact same serial number, but I can say with fairly good certainty that I think this about this potential card that I might buy. Anytime you can match serial numbers and be able to trace that, through the 10 plus years of data on WorthPoint or whatever it might be, I mean, that's a home run. That's about as good as you can get. But oftentimes that's not going to happen. But you can draw fairly reasonable conclusions that will help you, protect your investment, protect your cash, and not end up buying something that that you would probably have avoided buying, had you kind of just dug around a little bit to see if it made sense. I guess if you have something, if it's discovered that something in your collection is altered, I mean, at minimum, you absolutely have to disclose it if you're going to sell it. And ideally, you would have the item reslabbed as altered by one of the professional grading companies. I mean, there's no way around it. If it has been truly altered, it's been cut up, there's a different patch, whatever the case might be, like it's up to you to inform the next owner of that condition, of that circumstance. And, ideally everybody would slab the card with an altered designation, but at worst, the disclosure has to be, yes, this card was identified to have been altered, and here's what changed. So it's a hell of a bullet to have to bite, but it's unfortunately something that needs to be done. I guess one of the points that you and I talked about beforehand is, okay, this is all well and good when you're like looking at a card on eBay or, you're looking through Brent's previews for auctions and you're like, all right, I want to dig into this one before it starts running in 2 weeks. Well, what if you're at a show and you don't really have 2 weeks to do that research? How do you make those decisions on the fly, so to speak? And again, I think that in a situation like that, it's important to, if you see something that you like but you're worried, to be able to walk away.
Yep.
And just allow yourself, whether it's checking your phone for some of the tools that we just discussed, reaching out to different board members or whatever to ask questions, maybe see if the dealer will let you take a picture of the card, and that way you can go back and reference that with whatever tools you want to use. Because I mean, my God, taking pictures of a card is a perfectly normal thing to do. It's not 10 years ago when people would look at you like you're a weirdo. But yeah, the main thing is don't don't feel like you need to make a decision on the spot because there is that potential that somebody else might come up and buy it. If you're not comfortable
Yep.
with making the buy right then and there, even to a small degree, don't do it. If you come back and that particular item's gone, then so be it. It stinks that you missed out on something you did want, but at the end of the day, that specific approach to being able to walk away and get more comfortable before coming back to it, that will definitely pay dividends down the road.
Yeah, I wanted to tell the quick national story about that. I'm sure you remember this,
Yeah,
but
go for it.
at the last national, I was walking around by myself, and I'd found a table with a bunch of nice LeBron stuff that I was interested in. But but something about the cards felt off, and it's hard to describe until you kind of are there and you kind of just feel something feels weird. Like some of the cards that were raw that shouldn't have been. The cards that were slabbed were all 9.5s, and I've rarely seen cards like that 9.5. Something just didn't feel right. And then the dealer himself wasn't like the kindest person in the world. So I basically just like walked away and was like, no, I don't need any of this stuff. It's not worth this pain. And I went over to your table immediately. I was like, dude, what the heck is up with this table? And you're like, oh yeah, that dude's a trimmer, like for sure. And it's like, oh,
Yep.
I guess that my intuition was right. So at the very least, like walk away, go ask some people who you trust, and then go from there instead of buying on the spot because that's what they want you to do. They want you to get drawn in by the high end stuff and then buy something on the spot because you feel panic that it might be gone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The whole point is to move that stuff as quickly as possible. And if you walk away with the cash still in your pocket, then you still have the cash in your pocket. It's not a big deal. And then I think the last point would be, uh, you know, just if you're not comfortable with a card, um, send it back. I mean, this isn't so much for card shows, but if you buy something online, and it's not a matter of just buyer's remorse because a young guy has a couple bad games in a row or whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you buy something and you get it in hand and you look it over, whether it's graded or ungraded, um, and you start to look at it and you feel that just something is off, you you can return it. I mean, I know some people might disagree with that, but it's I just don't think it's worth it have to make the kind of cash outlays that are needed to be made these days in order to buy any kind of card, whether it's $100, 1,000, or more. And if you have it and you're not happy with it, just send it back. It might be the seller probably won't be too happy, um, but you're within your right to be able to do that. I mean, I'll use this as an opportunity to the do not send friends and family horn, because if it's a PayPal transaction and you send gift and you get it in hand and you discover that something just off or doesn't look right, then you're SOL. Like you can't do anything. But PayPal does have that incredibly long 180-day return policy. So if you get it back and you see something, I would say don't feel bad about sending it back. I would say that if you get something in hand, if you make the buy and you look at it and you're not happy, reach out to the seller as soon as possible, because while PayPal does have that 180-day policy, if I'm a seller, I'm going to be much more likely to not necessarily cooperate's the wrong word, but I'll be much more receptive to working with a buyer who has issues with a card when they have it in hand, or shortly thereafter, as opposed to 4 months down the road when they're saying this feels off. If it's 4 months down the road and it feels off because you show me that before and after pics have somebody just completely hacked off the bottom edge, then that's fine. Send it back. But if it's your gut feeling, I don't have anything wrong with a gut feeling, but the length or the statute of limitations on that gut feeling holding water is, it needs to be taken into consideration.
For sure. Um, and then the last piece, I'll just reiterate that we have responsibility as buyers to alert both the auction houses and the grading companies of problems we see. I think a lot of times we just assume that they know what's going on in every scenario, but they don't always know. So it's on us to alert those people. And as we've seen, even with Brent jumping onto the threads and responding to us, he's receptive to us reaching out to them. So I think that's another last piece for us to try to get those guys more involved and help with this.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. And just quickly on that point too, like I'll probably catch some crap for this too, but it's not the job of the auction houses to go through their consigners inventory, especially when that inventory has been professionally graded, and verify the authenticity of the card to make sure that it hasn't been trimmed. That's not what they do. Their job is to sell the items that they get. So the fact that they are receptive to the community doing the legwork in order to identify this for them and have taken action is fantastic. So again, the point there is when you show them the facts, they are open to the facts and they are taking action on those facts, and that's good. So it people have any number of gripes with the auction houses, which is fine, but in this particular instance, the onus does fall on us to try and weed this stuff out.
right. All right. So to wrap all this up in a nice bow, let's go. Let's just go step by step through the resolutions that we've already touched on, and maybe some new ones. So what are the resolutions? How do we solve this? Because it's obviously a big problem, and I'd hate to walk away and not feel like there's hope and possible ways we can fix this.
No, definitely. And I think from the hobby boards perspective, Instagram perspective, whatever you want to call it, the main thing is to just keep digging in if something looks off. I mean, the threads that we've seen, walking through the rationale as to why people think something's not right. Those are a great start. I know that there's a couple guys on Blowout who are trying to put together some kind of master threads for cards that have been shown to be proven altered. I think those are fantastic additions, and people should try and update those as to the extent possible when a card is shown to be altered. I guess it's kind of continue from our perspective. It's continuing to just put in that legwork to track this stuff down, and then I guess also from our perspective, but also from the perspective of the grading companies, is that we got to see some things that seem very basic to us. But for example, logging serial numbers into a grading submission when you grade a card that's been stamped with a factory serial number. Like we were talking before this that how much time and how many headaches could that have saved us had we been able to go back and kind of see the provenance of a card 100 out of 500 if it's been graded 3 times and it started as a BGS 7 and now it's a 9.5. Like that seems so basic to me, to just add a couple more fields into a grading database, and have whomever it is submit the original grade of these serial numbered cards where possible. So I mean I would say that's a really, really big one. That we can try and lean on the grading companies to hopefully introduce, although it might be a little bit too late, but better late than never, I guess. I would say that, also, as we mentioned with the consigners, is just continue to take down the stuff that when we show you it's altered, even if that is in a grading slab, because unfortunately we've hit the point where the people cutting these cards up they're beating the system. So you can't fully rely on the system anymore, which is a discussion for a different podcast on a different day. But just continue to listen to the hobby, to what we have to say, because we kind of know what we're talking about a lot of times. Sometimes we don't. But yeah, just continue to engage with the hobby and be open to that back and forth and that dialogue, especially like you were discussing earlier with some of the counterfeit inserts and the success that specifically with PSA that you and a lot of other guys have had on educating them on what's real versus what's fake. I mean, that's invaluable going forward. And then finally, just like we kind of always say, but do your homework. If something's off for whatever reason, if the gut doesn't feel right, let us know. Take a look online. I think the point that we touched on with going to a show in person and being able to walk away, I think that's really, really, really important. You know, that you're not losing anything by walking away. I can't stress that enough. And I've walked away from stuff that I know I could make money on, but if it depending on who the seller was or what the grade was or the fact that it wasn't graded, it's just not worth it. So even if it doesn't feel right in person, don't go into your pocket. It's not a big deal. Yeah, and then as always, like we're always here. Whatever it is, questions. It you know we're happy to help with whatever we can, however we can.
Yep, absolutely. Um, last thing I want to jump in with is about the threads themselves and how we need as a community need to do a little bit better job of being more civil in the threads and keeping the threads productive. And to your point, they've actually been vastly more productive in the recent weeks, which is really great to see. Uh, because these are really touchy subjects for all people involved. So we need to be respectful of everybody. Keep the keep the posts, fact based. Keep them objective. Keep them, with pictures, evidence, whatever you can do to help steer it in the right direction instead of slinging mud around. So I know everyone is very passionate about this, and we want to get this solved, but we also need to do it in a respectful, civil way.
Co-signed.
Great. And yes, to your point, reach out for help. I'm here, you're here, the threads are here. Um, I think we all kind of agree we want to solve this. So let's use the community and let's use all these tools we went over, all this research, and
Yeah,
I don't have any
despite
last
all
points.
despite this hour of gloom and doom, like this is still fun. I mean, still it's still a hobby. It's still cardboard. It's still people. It's still grown men playing a sport. So like we should still be able to enjoy this, and I think we can. It's just there's some more work that's now required in order to uh, make sure that we all don't get screwed.
And I think
If I can put it delicately.
I've even talked to you about this before, but it almost like increases the difficulty of the hunt, which is like a lot of the fun for us. Like now, not
Yeah,
only do we have to find the card, we have to find the one that we know isn't altered and has a strong provenance, right?
yeah. A seven looks a lot more appealing than like a 9.5 on some of this stuff now.
I know you and I have some like really big cards in PSA 8 cases, and I know I'll probably speak for you, but like it doesn't bother me that it's an 8, mostly
I'm
because
thrilled. I'm thrilled.
nobody's tried to mess with this one. It's an 8.
Yeah, these corners look terrible. Awesome.
That's how I like it. Kiki talked about that a lot in the last video. Like he loves looking for the dinged up cards, right? Because he knows, it's been in some kid's possession and it has a story, and none of that story involves someone trimming it. So that's great to point out at the end here.
Yep.
All right, man. Thanks for taking the bullet on this one and jumping in this video. I know it hasn't been like the best one, but I think it's important, and I'm glad you were able to do it. So I really appreciate your time, and I hope people get a lot of value out of this one.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, talk to you later.
See ya.